What is up, fellow sickos? I am Dan Favale coming at you with the one, the only, the legendary, the certified fantabulous co-host of the Hardwood Knocks podcast, Mr. Grant Hughes. We are here to draft the NBA stars that are most likely to be traded next. I'm going to throw it to Grant to basically just explain this, but this is an exercise that I think some people will consider a clickbait, and I guess it sort of is. But this is these are the conversations that are happening around the league every single day, as Nate Duncan likes to say this. Like, people, it is clickbait. Like, this is the clickbaity. But shout out to, I think, subscriber Tom was the one who asked for something like this. We're gonna put kind of a different spin on it. But these are the conversations that are just happening around the league nonstop. It doesn't matter what time of the year it is, right, Grant?
Well, I mean, no, it doesn't matter what time of year it is, and like, it's kind of. I'll put it this way, like, ESPN's got an article out today. I think it's Windhorst and Bontemps talking about, like, yeah, the playoffs are coming, but everyone's just discussing free agency. And like the thrust of that article is that free agency is going to be terrible. But it just underscores the idea that, like, oh, right, yeah, we should be caring about who's going to avoid the play-in and who's climbing into the sixth spot or whatever. And it's like, no, the front offices are just all focused on the transactional side, which of course, but even now, like, this is so, yeah, it's what fans are interested in, and it's what front offices are actually doing as their teams are trying to, like, settle playoff position. So it's appropriate.
If you haven't skipped the intro, let us know your top 5 stars in the comment section or in our Discord, links in the podcast YouTube description, that you think are going to be traded next. Before we do that, though, let's spend, what do you think, like 60 or 75 minutes on LeBron versus Stephen A? How long?
Yeah, could we? That'd be great. Just not enough oxygen has been given to the hottest beef around.
Would you be able to explain to the kids what it is that we're actually doing here, though?
What are we doing? Basically, we are going to go back and forth. Dan and I will each draft, essentially, 5 players. Hopefully there'll be some sniping, like, oh, that was my second pick and Dan took him, before I was ready or whatever.
I've already did it by sending you my fake order so that you
yeah, this has been a long con by you over the last 36 hours to really throw off my draft strategy. So we are drafting stars. The definition for that is fairly loose, but it's like, if you have any doubt about whether this guy's a star, you probably shouldn't pick him. So it's like, yeah, he's been an all-star at some point. We were joking before. You might just say, if he's subject to the player participation policy, then it's a safe pick, because he's been an all-star or all-NBA or an award winner or whatever at some point in the last, 3 years? So, it's a fairly loose definition, but it's like, the names, as you'll see, are fairly big. And then the idea is, we didn't put a specific timeline on it. We are just trying to guess the next star to be traded. So an ideal number 1 pick is a huge name that is the next name traded. So, like, great if it's this offseason, that should be the goal, but we're going for the nearest point in time from now that someone's going to be traded. And so maybe a couple of these will extend into, next offseason or next trade deadline. Maybe some of these guys we pick will not be traded at all. That makes it a bad pick. But it is also something we can kind of keep track of over the next, however many months, to see, like, how our teams fared, how our picks did relative to our draft slots, I guess.
We should bookmark this, because it'd be fun to do it around the same time next year to see how we fared, like, through the offseason and the 2026 trade deadline, to see who's still on the team. That was very well put. The only thing I would add, and it's more of a question, or I'll tell you how I did it, but to use an example of just, like, Drew Holiday will qualify for this exercise. Mm-hmm. Like, if I think he's going to be moved sooner, but I don't think it's because that other teams want him or he has the leverage. Like, it's not because, oh, he's coming up on a new deal or they're at a crossroads. It's the Celtics are looking to get out of the second apron or shave their luxury tax bill. I default to just, like, the higher stakes or the higher profile situations than that.
I mean, that's your strategy, Dan. I'm not going to tell you how to do your draft.
Yours is just going to be filled with all these guys that you think are just going to be, like, salary types.
Well, I mean, I guess what I would say is, first of all, Holiday's maybe one of those guys where he's on my long list for sure. He's maybe one of those guys where it's like, is he a star though? Would be one concern. But he would fit into as would several other Celtics potentially, a possibility of being moved like pretty soon. Like that, so that would make him a better pick, right? Like if anybody you think might change teams via trade this summer is a good pick. So Holiday would fit into that category.
I did definitely look at this through like a 2020, like by the 2026 deadline, like lens was kind of, but I also recognize that some years are a little bit lighter on the star trades than others. And so like 27 and beyond, like does make some sense to consider as well.
Yeah.
Are you ready to get started?
Let's draft.
We didn't determine who gets the number one pick. Since you did the explanation, I will allow you the number one pick. And since we're both going to have the same number one pick, I kind of don't think that it matters.
Well, I mean, this is a gift to me. Like, so there's only one player in consideration here who like has, in terms of a trade possibility, more than speculation attached to him, which is Kevin Durant, and that's he has to be my first pick, and that's because following maybe being shopped, definitely being shopped at the trade deadline, things fell apart with him and the Suns. There were reports that the two parties will work together to find a destination after the season. So it's laid out there for us. Like he's going to be moved. Like, I don't know I wouldn't put a percentage chance on it, but I would just ask you, like, what will your reaction be if Kevin Durant is on the Suns to start the 25-26 season?
I guess at this point, nothing that involves Kevin Durant should shock me, but I'd be pretty surprised if he is still a member of the Suns, given how openly, not only that they shopped him, but how openly he talked about it and acknowledged that he was surprised by it. And then I think the final clue is just Brian Windhorst, we know, is one of the most plugged in guys around the league, but he doesn't say things unless they're really going to happen, or he'll let you know after the fact. He said that they're going to work together to find a trade. And so this was just like, what's the % chance that you would give Kevin Durant of still being on the Suns next season?
5, 10, if you want to be, I mean,
5 seems high.
Yeah. No, it's like, I guess, like, if you told me KD was on the Suns to start next season, like all of my questions would be some version of like, well, goddamn, how did they trade for LeBron? Or like, how did they get Steph? Like, something insane like that, where it's, well, they get a big, they flipped it and they're like, what do we got to do to keep him happy or something? Or like, what they get for Devin Booker when they shipped him out because they chose KD over, something completely like off the rails like that.
What do you think they're going to target in a Durant trade?
That's trying to like get inside the Suns' thinking is, well, actually, is it that hard? Because what they'll target, I guess, is someone that's like in his prime, or someones that are in their primes now that can help the team win, because there's no incentive to lose unless he goes to Houston in a deal that gets you those picks back to where you actually do. You get something by stripping the roster down and losing games. Like it's hard to envision the Suns based on what they've done since Matt Ishbia became the owner and what he said like within the last handful of weeks about not wanting to rebuild and like nobody's interested in that. Like it would be shocking to me if they traded Durant for like a package of picks. And like, I mean, still then you're still taking back a huge amount of salary anyway. So like, I would assume they would want that salary to be like hugely productive players that could help you win now and keep Devin Booker from saying like, okay, I need to get out of here.
Which I think dovetails nicely with my number one overall pick. This goes against the grain of reporting. I'm taking Devin Booker.
I like it.
Here's my thing. All the reporting says he doesn't want to leave Phoenix. You just mentioned what Matt Ishbia says about they're never trading Devin Booker. They're not going to rebuild. I do not see a scenario where you sit there and say, oh, they got a return off of Kevin Durant that makes it worthwhile for Devin Booker to stay in Phoenix. You need to get either someone who, you can't even say keeps open your title window, but actually opens it right away, because it's not open right now. Right. That's with Kevin Durant. Or you need to get a package of picks that you can then immediately flip and be prepared to outbid teams for a player that would open your title window. And I think I don't view this as a risk solely because I think that Devin Booker is 100% going to retire in Phoenix. I'm sure he would prefer to never play for another team. I look at it as more so through the contract where it's okay. He has 3 years, $175.4 million left. So it feels like we'd have another season before maybe he just naturally applies pressure to the organization. And we know, based off at least what the Suns have said, they're not going to be the ones to initiate this. This isn't going to be a Mavericks with Luka Doncic or even kind of the Kings with De'Aaron Fox a little bit. So that's where the risk is. But if I'm Devin Booker, I'm in the thick of my prime. I watch how the past couple of seasons have gone. I like, short of them trading Kevin Durant for someone who is better than Kevin Durant, I don't know how that doesn't immediately start the Devin Booker clock. And so the risk might be, oh, again, that's a 2026 offseason thing, not even a deadline thing. But the Sun situation is just so hopeless that this is the pick I'm going with. So I'm swinging on Devin Booker as my first overall pick.
I think that's totally I think there's a real scenario where the second Durant is traded, Booker goes to the front office and says, like, all right, I'm out. And so then they have to just, it's got to happen then, or it gets really ugly. So like these might just be the next two in order because one's going to trigger the other.
The other thing that I factored into, and maybe they can do this with Durant, I always just assume that it's not at least as possible. Devin Booker, I think, is the player that's going to be more suited to getting you back your own picks from Houston.
For sure.
So the fact that that's in play maybe makes it even more likely that you would move on from Devin Booker sooner after a Kevin Durant trade.
There's no scenario where this happens in the reverse order, though, right? Where it's like, unless it's just the Suns had been planning to blow it up all along and the Booker move with Houston materializes first. But like Booker is there until Durant is not, right? Like Durant has to be the precursor move, I think.
I'll frame it this way. I think it's way more likely that Kevin Durant is on the Phoenix Suns next year than Devin Booker gets traded before Kevin Durant.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's right. All right. So I got another pick here. We've talked about this guy and kind of, well, I don't know, hemmed and hawed is too, maybe that's accurate. I got to pick Giannis. And that depends largely on another playoff disappointment. And it depends on like most of the reporting not being wrong, but like the circumstances around it changing, because he has basically like applied pressure in the offseason, gotten the Bucks to make some moves, doesn't really ever, agitate during the year. I think we get into this offseason. I'm not sold on the Bucks being more than like, maybe they sneak out of the first round or whatever. I think that's kind of realistically, I think that's just about as far as they can get. Especially like who knows with Dame now, like maybe even winning a round is like ambitious. And given how long he's been there, given just, you look at the flexibility for this team, we have talked about this recently, is just like, it's just diminishing. They have so much money wrapped up in a couple guys. I don't think Kuzma helps them. I think Brook Lopez's free agency is going to be interesting. So I think it has to be Giannis. And weirdly, like I still feel like less certain about that than there's probably been 3 to 5 instances over the last couple of years where it seemed much more likely that he was going to be gone. But I still feel like he has to be the pick just because, like, I mean, how long is this going to go really? Like the Bucks are very much like tailing off, and I think he's finally going to like, not politely, but like professionally make it clear to the front office, like, okay, guys, that you had a long runway. It's time.
I struggled with him for a couple of reasons. And I think the biggest one is if I'm the Bucks, I'm not even thinking about this until Giannis pushes for it.
Right.
And because your draft picks are so kind of spread out, there's no Suns and Houston situation where you could trade Giannis, get back a good chunk of your own draft and rebuild that way. And I just wonder and I also kind of wondered, wouldn't there be a chance that Damian Lillard gets moved first? Because the Bucks are either trying to maximize what's going on with Giannis, or does Dame just decide like it's not working out for me here? I'm approaching the end of my contract, and they're going to get hosed in negotiations. But then that is the impetus for Giannis. Then I really struggled with him because I think the Bucks are at a major inflection point following this Dame injury specifically, and I think you and I probably would have agreed that. How likely were they to win a championship at full strength this year? Certainly more likely if Dame was going to be healthy. So this was always going to be tough. The timeline with me when you factor in the imminence, if we had said by 2027, I'm not even like the 27 deadline, I won't even second guess this as things lay now. But because we're trying to focus on like the actual timeline of it, I didn't know where to put him.
Yeah, it's tough. Like, you certainly should, as the Bucks, try to move Dame first. I just don't know. I don't know how much value he has. Hopefully here we have what are his years in dollars left. I know we get up into the 60s towards the end of this current contract. But like, given this, and like, this isn't necessarily the type of injury that's going to be like recurring. So 2 years, 112.6 million, going to make 54 next year, 58 and a half the following year. That's basically 35% of the cap both seasons. Which is a player option that last year. Like, I'm not sure who's like kicking the door down for that. And so, like, while I agree that Dame, you should do everything before you trade Giannis as the Bucks. Like, Giannis being traded has to be the last resort and or the thing that happens when he tells you it needs to happen. I just don't know how feasible it is to move Dame. Like, who's got $50+ million in contracts and picks and is willing to give up any of that stuff for Dame at this stage of the game? Like, that's just a tough fit.
I've almost tried to view it through the lens of, would Milwaukee, if it's just their distant first round pick and the swap plus Dame, who does that get you in the conversation for? Is it a bucket of players? Is there just a name that's a bigger name? They've said that they want, like, Milwaukee's on their list, and that gives you a little bit of leverage. But you're right that also complicates the situation too, because especially coming off of, if he doesn't play again this year, you have the specter of, okay, well, what does he look like next season?
Right. I mean, he's not at a point in his career where it's like, next year will be better. Like, that, this is very much like you're just incrementally losing, value, effectiveness, productivity every year from now on.
I guess what would be my follow-up, but I guess I should wait until your third pick to ask this question, because if you're going to say that Giannis is going to be moved next, like, Damian Lillard should inherently be on your list then, because why keep Dame at that point if Giannis is gone?
Well, it's a little like Booker and Durant. It's like, if it's one, it's probably both, and it's just a question of the order. So yeah, you could game it and say, like, well, Dame actually should have been the pick before Giannis. I just don't. It's so much easier for me to, if you put Giannis on the market and Dame on the market, it's just way easier to trade Giannis. So I think that kind of nudged me that way, while acknowledging, like, yeah, you should, and I just said it, you should try to trade Dame first. I just don't know how easy that's going to be.
I guess we got to get to my second pick, which I'm kind of struggling between two players at the moment. I'm actually really struggling between three, and I'm kind of afraid to say one of them, so I'm probably going to steer clear of that guy for now. I'm going to go with Domantas Sabonis.
That was my next pick.
Now, this gets interesting because the Kings, like, they are so incompetent. I honestly feel terribly for King. Did you see Vlade Divac?
All right, hold on. Are you reading off of my script right now? Is that what's happening?
This team is just so, they don't know what the decision makers don't know what they're doing. And I'm not talking about the Mike Brown extension and dismissal. I'm not talking about the lead up to the De'Aaron Fox breakup, the way, like, what they prioritized in return for him. I'm not even talking about the Domantas Sabonis noise, which is part of this, of, okay, he's going to this is someone that has a bunch of years left on his contract, and the reporting is he's going to reevaluate the situation this summer. And you know what? This predated the report, but I don't blame him when Vlade Divac is back in the fold, Grant. Did you see that? I'm not talking about Vlade Divac as the person. I know he's beloved by Kings fans for what he did there as a player. He is one of the worst executives in the history of, like, basketball ops at this point. And that was a terrible time period for Kings fans. What are you doing here? Wes Wilcox, the assistant GM, he left there. This team is hopeless. They're going to have to blow it up at some point. The reason I'm hesitant to pick Sabonis is because I don't know what his actual trade value is. He's a very specific fit, which is not to say that he's bad. I've had him on All NBA. But 3 years and $140 million finishes up in his age 31 season for someone who, I think the benefit of him is that he's shown that he doesn't need to necessarily be your highest volume on ball guy, but that is very much tied to a lot of his value. And I think it gives you more value on defense, because if you have someone who could grab defensive rebounds and bring the ball up the floor, that is helping your offense, but it's also helping end possessions on the defensive end. I think there'd be teams interested in him, but you almost need to tailor your entire squad around him, or make sure that you have that second star who is a good fit alongside him. And it's not the most intuitive thing to do. So I struggle to find a fit. And then the second part would be because we know the Kings are just awful. If Sabonis says he wants out, are they going to drag this out because they can't get a return that they deem helps them remain quote unquote in the playoff picture as part of like his departure? And so if I trusted them to bring in new decision makers or just say, oh, we're actually going to rebuild, I might have had Sabonis as my number one. Well, my number one pick aside from a Kevin Durant, but I don't trust the Kings. And I think just even as we're talking, I'm trying to think, well, what's the team that could talk themselves into Domas Sabonis? And I don't really have one at the ready. And that sort of, so I'm just going on blind faith here that Sabonis is going to want out and that there will be teams that kind of, maybe he doesn't get a ton of value relative to some of the other guys that we've talked about and that we will continue to talk about. But the Kings are just a dumpster fire. And I don't think that he's going to want to stay there. And I think that that's sort of the next domino to fall in Sacramento.
Yeah, it's a good pick. I think the fact that, well, again, it's hard to know. I was going to say the Kings acted very quickly with the Fox situation. Like, we had a lot of conversations about like, is this going to happen at this deadline? Probably not. It'll be the off season or maybe, before next year. And then boom, he was gone. So if Sabonis does seek clarity, I think you could very quickly, by the way, there's ample clarity. It's very clear what's like, what the trajectory of this franchise is. Like what, he can't realistically have any questions about what's going on. So the search for clarity is basically already over. So when he goes to the front office and says like, some version of time for me to go, we should probably, based on precedent, have faith that like that's going to happen fairly quickly. So that's why it could happen this offseason. He's a high likelihood to move, even with all the stuff you outlined. And that's a version of like just my criticism of his player type over the years is like, you've got to tailor a whole bunch of things to fit him. And then even when you do that, your ceiling's low just because of the type of player that he is. So it is hard to find a destination. It is hard to find a team that like views him as, oh, he's the put us over the top kind of piece, which is how you would have to view him because he's making 40 plus million up to almost 50 in the last year of that deal. It's like, he's not a mid-level, type acquisition where it's like, yeah, we'll fit him in and we don't, he can kind of work with whatever setup and personnel we have. And it's like, no, he's got to be the central figure really in a lot of places. And given the cost and his game, like that just doesn't work. So
what the team is going to be though, right? They're going to talk something. What were you going to say?
The team is going to be Chicago. Like, is that what's going to happen?
Chicago? It's like, look at how Josh Giddey played the end of the year. We're going to rebuild around him and Domas Sabonis, and we're going to, ride them right to the 9 seed.
Don't wish that. The Bulls fans are having a good time or a conflicted good time right now. So please don't wish that on.
That team is a heart attack.
It's fun. They're fun. I mean, I don't know. That doesn't account for anything meaningful, but they're fun.
I'm disappointed I didn't get to watch like the Lakers Bulls ending live. I actually went back and I watched it multiple times. Just like, what the hell?
How? Just how? Yeah.
They shot 15 of 19 in the fourth quarter, Grant, the Bulls.
And that's not even, that's like the fifth most exciting, interesting thing about that quarter. It's just like all the little isolated plays are yeah. Okay. Good pick. I'm stalling because I don't know. He was definitely clearly the next best guy on the board. We've talked about Dame. I probably should consider him here since we just kind of linked him to Giannis. In the interest of kind of, I don't know, broadening the discussion, I think I'm going to go Lauri Markkanen.
That's a good pick.
Couldn't be traded this year because he signed that new deal that kind of put any conversation about a move on hiatus for a full season. So what he has left now is 3 more years, 149 million. He'll make 27% of the cap next year. That's 46-ish. He's going to make just under 50 in 26-27, 50, almost 54 in 27-28. So no small amount of money. Hasn't looked great this year. Bigger picture, still, like, do you think he fits with whatever it is happening with the Jazz right now? Like, because we've spent the season trying to talk ourselves into, is rookie or second year guy X a cornerstone? And So far, the answer is a pretty resounding no. Like, I guess Walker Kessler is probably the most accomplished of that core, and he's not a second-year guy. But we've liked what we've seen from Filipowski. Isaiah Collier is interesting. Keontae George still has his merits. Taylor Hendricks has been out all year. We still, I think, are both on board with him. There's not like a tentpole star there. So the rebuild continues. What kind of year is Markkanen going to have next year with this team? How valuable is that versus like more shit that you could get for him? So that's the approach I'm taking, is like, he doesn't make sense on this team. And I think, unlike Sabonis, the range of suitors should be pretty wide, because everybody wants a big guy that can shoot it and like can fit as like a supplementary star. The money's high for that type of player, but I think he's got just much broader appeal.
Yeah, he's more scalable than someone like Sabonis, even if you believe that Sabonis is the better player. I always viewed his extension, and he was I considered taking him with my number 2 pick. I always considered his extension as Utah purchasing his complacence for 2 more seasons.
Yeah, bought his silence, I think I've heard you say.
What's that?
Bought his silence.
Bought his silence. Yeah. But I'm wondering if there's more urgency from their perspective after the season that he's currently having. To where it's just like, this has not been even close to his best year. And if he has another one like this contract very clearly drifts underwater. And so I'm wondering if there'll be more urgency on their part to do that this year. But the other thing I thought about is, if they have a top 4 pick, do you think let's say they get, I don't even want to call it lottery lucky. They have the lowest winning percentage in the league right now. But if they get the number 1 or the number 2 pick, do you think it's less likely that they move him because they want to, like, it's not that they're trying to accelerate their rebuild because they've been in it a little bit longer than some of these other teams, but they can build back up his value if they're actually putting more talent around him? Or is that too much of a game? Because in my head, I was like, if they end up like slipping to fourth in the lottery, and like they're not really getting to make their own, they're making a decision, but they're not getting to make the decision. I've wondered if they're going to decide, we need to move Lowry because, 1, we don't know if who we're bringing in is going to be able to ensure that they help optimize him or make his life easier. And then 2, we just flat out need to figure out a way to get more bites at the apple at this point.
I mean, that's the fascinating thing, is like, other than the Thunder, the Jazz have the most bites at the apple, right? In terms of like future firsts. So that actually is kind of a complicating factor for a Markkanen trade, is that if you're a team in the Jazz's position, typically what you want are what you're saying. Is like, we want more first. We want more draft equity. We're starting over. We're in the infancy of our rebuild somehow, 3+ years in. But do they need that? Like, so that makes it tricky. Like, I'm kind of arguing again. I'm still taking Markkanen, but like, there are complications with, like, 1, you pointed to, like, at some point, this deal might not be viewed as positive value. Like, now that might need another kind of iffy season from him, but like, that's on the table. And then it's like, well, as the Jazz, if you're not going to say we'd like 3 firsts somehow because we got more than we can use anyway, what do you want? Like, so maybe that narrows. I said, he's got a broad spectrum of teams that'd be interested. Maybe it's narrower than that, because Utah just, like, I don't know what the $50-ish million in salary you want coming back is going to look like. Like, if it's not going to be a pick heavy package. So it could be tricky. I kind of go with the, like, which one of these things doesn't belong logic. And Markkanen on this team, for where it is in its trajectory, how much he's making, where he's at in his career, he's sneakily older than you think. Just it doesn't square. And so that's kind of the most dumbed down version of like why I think he belongs on this, or not list, but like why I picked him.
Who do I want to take with my 3rd pick? This is tough. I don't want to. I'm still looking at a guy that I think I'm going to end up. Well, I don't know. I only have 3 picks left. Do we go here? I think I might go here. I'm going to say Ja Morant.
Okay.
This is a good time to talk. Right before we jumped on, the Grizzlies fired Taylor Jenkins as their head coach, which just, I don't know if you want to spend a couple minutes on that really quickly. We're going to do it at the end, but this is a wild time of year. You are in the playoff picture. You've not been performing too well over the past month and a half or whatever. I get that. But wild timing, we still haven't received additional reporting on it. I'm not saying that this is going to inform why they would want to get rid of Morant, but like, this is not indicative of a team that has its shit together.
That is well said.
So that's why I'm going with John Morant. But I want to talk about the Taylor Jenkins. I'll get into my justification for John Morant here. The Taylor Jenkins firing. Can you even think of? I asked you and you couldn't have, and I could. Like, what is the justification behind doing this now?
I don't know. We were trying to. It's like, oh, the Quinn Snyder takeover in Atlanta, that seemed late, but like as you remembered correctly, and I didn't. Joe Prunty was an interim there for a while, and so like they had fired the coach long before Snyder. Snyder took over late, but like it's not quite the same situation. I'm sure someone out there will remember something that is like a precedent for this, but it's weird timing. And I think and nobody as we're recording this seems to have any insight into the why of it all. It does just seem like something happened, or several somethings happened over, in recent weeks, because the Grizzlies have been playing poorly. Morant's missing time. You've seen Desmond Bain shoving Santi Aldama on the bench. Like, it's not a kumbaya situation there. Let's go step back, because I think for a lot of this year, certainly early on, like Taylor Jenkins was a coach of the year candidate. I think I stumped for him in like a roundtable we did at some point. This might have been November, but still. And we lauded this offense, nobody's setting screens. That's amazing. Like, oh, look at how creative this coaching staff has become. And now here we are. So to tie it back, so I have no good explanation. This is extremely strange. Why not just wait until presumably you flame out in the playoffs, and then nobody's asking questions about why Jenkins got fired? You just have, well, we underperformed, so that's why. To tie it to the John Morant thing, like I think that's a great pick, because I think anything's on the table now. It really does just feel like it's maybe this mix it just doesn't have it, or this group has run its course with like the Jenkins, I guess Bain and Jackson core. And I don't know. I think Morant's a good pick for a lot of reasons. Memphis maybe, like, look, he's missed a ton of time again this year. That player type is not going to age great, especially because he's shown no signs of being able to shoot it well enough from deep to offset athletic declines. I know I harp on that all the time. I just really believe it. Like, some guys have short primes, and he's like exhibit A of the type of player that has a short prime. I do think, actually, can you imagine if Morant were on the market? There would be a lot of teams, I think, that would, because he's like your on ball first option guy that's young enough you could talk yourself into a change of scenery being all he needs. All the off court stuff that's happened is like far enough in the rear view to where maybe it's not a concern for an acquiring team. I think that's a great pick. That was a great pick before the Jenkins firing. It's even better now.
Yeah, but just to wrap up on Jenkins, I try to rationalize it with the front office can't fire themselves. And I think that they're kind of the biggest culprits of just, you look at their transactional relative inactivity or they swung on Marcus Smart and missed. And then it's just, they don't do anything. Like, you couldn't even get Dorian Finney-Smith. You salary dump Marcus Smart. I don't know that you've given Taylor Jenkins the talent to be much better than this, especially when you factor in all the injuries they've dealt with. Mm-hmm. I will say, like, some of his rotations, when you look at how the minutes are spread out at full strength, they feel curious. But I also just wonder, well, how much of that is just, he's like, there's just more of this carousel of availability than with other teams. I think his most damning thing, aside from the most recent stretch, they have one of the worst records among playoff teams against teams 500 or better. I think they're 11-20 that's like Nixian. And that's a problem. So, but again, it's April basically. Like, this is not, if you're worried that he's not the guy, like, that's a decision you should have made probably closer to the trade deadline, if had a more honest conversation about it over the offseason. But I do appreciate, or at least I would like to think this way, that the way it was leaked, they are trolling the Kings because they said that Taylor Jenkins was fired in person. And this was like Mike Brown receiving a phone call on the way to the airport. So I respect trolling the Kings. I'm just going to choose. That's how I'm going to read it. I hope everyone's okay with that. The name, Morant has 3 years left on his deal. I think that we're at least, we have to say this. If he's on the Grizzlies through next season, which is probably the most likely outcome, we're still like a year away where if they didn't go deep in the playoffs, you're now having the John Morant conversation this time next year, or a couple months, like the 2026 offseason. That's when he has 2 years left on his deal. He doesn't have a player option, but that can increase his trade value at that point. I think there's maybe value. What makes this tough is when you have Jaren Jackson Jr., when you've paid Desmond Bain, you could say, right, we're not really in a position to where we take a step back and sort of retool and take a gap year. At the same time, it's like, well, you could be. You're not especially old elsewhere. You don't have a bad deal on your books. You're about to either extend or renegotiate and extend Jaren Jackson Jr. This is a team that I think could go a number of different directions in a trade package. And I also think, despite what Zach Kleiman said after the initial speculation came out about John Morant, one, I know this, Grant. I know you're sitting down, and this is probably going to break a ton of illusions for you. NBA front offices sometimes don't tell the truth.
No.
Yeah, I'm sorry to be the guy that breaks that for you. So I could see this being a front office that makes the decision before John Morant goes to them and decides that he's unhappy. When you look at his availability, some of the functional limitations that you laid out, and they might say it's not about John Morant not being a good player, but if they don't think that they can build, let's say, a high caliber playoff proof offense around him, which is the question that we still have about the Grizzlies. Again, I think it's on the front office more than anyone. I guess what I'm struggling with now is I almost liked this pick before the Taylor Jenkins firing, because now I'm like, well, if you're Grizzlies ownership, are you letting this front office now handle the John Morant trade? Like, do you think that Zach Kleiman, does he have the latitude to say like it's time to sort of reorient this roster without John Morant? Because you have to imagine with their transactional track record of late and now going through another coach, maybe that's why you make the move, because you know you have that latitude. But I think that honestly, it's easier to focus on the Grizzlies because of the Taylor Jenkins firing. Like, oh, things are in disarray. But it also makes me wonder, okay, well, now you don't have, like, what is the cover for this front office? And so if you're ownership, why are they the ones that are making a decision on John Morant at all?
Could we be overthinking it a little bit? And now I'm going to like not quite play devil's advocate, but like this just be as simple as it is a him or me thing. And like, things aren't going great. John Morant has been a problematic presence for going on 2+ years. The front office decided, well, I mean, let's just move on from Jenkins now. And that means we're going to give the whole Morant era another year or whatever. Like, could it just be that where it was kind of a decision between, now, obviously you can't trade Morant today. You have to wait till the offseason. You could have waited until the offseason to fire Jenkins too. The timing of that is still, I can't wait to hear what actually precipitated this. But could it just be that? Could it just be, we don't love it, but we're going to go with Morant and see if another coach can kind of get this thing figured out? Just because it's easy. It's always easier. It's always easier to fire the coach.
And it's not to say that John Morant isn't transcendent either. Although I am begging the Orlando Magic to stay away. That is not the
that's the wrong fit.
But yeah, that's the wrong fit. See, I'm going with him at number 3. Don't feel too great about that one, but I feel like that's the territory we're entering.
Yeah, I got, there's like 2 or 3, and Dame is just sitting there, which is like, I feel like you should take Dame because that could undercut my Giannis pick because Dame could be taken first. But I'm gonna leave Dame alone still. I'm gonna go. Oh man. All right, I'm just gonna do it. I am going to select Anthony Davis, and that has a chance to be dead wrong if Dallas continues to employ Nico Harrison, whose fate is like just as tied to Anthony Davis as is the fate, as more tied to Davis than the fate of any executive to any player throughout the league, probably. Because like, this is the guy you targeted. This is the guy you prioritized over a more open bidding war for Luka Doncic. This is the guy you're cool with paying on his next deal, potentially. So really what I'm drafting is that Nico Harrison is not going to be making decisions in Dallas for much longer. This will just be wrong if he keeps the job through all of next year. I just don't know how likely that, like, it's just a tidal wave of negative fan sentiment and just negative coverage and just incredulous writing, speaking, reporting about like how in the world is Dallas in this position. The Kyrie Irving injury is bad luck, but it does not make it likelier that Anthony Davis is still around, because if anything, Kyrie getting hurt might provide cover to say like, well, that 3 to 4 year window we were talking about is that's kind of wrecked now. So we got to just cut our losses and make the best of a bad situation, trade Davis for assets, start all the way over. There are ways this pick goes very badly for me. I am just prepared to bet on the possibility of Dallas deciding Nico Harrison needs to go, and the next person in charge is like, what is Anthony Davis doing on this roster?
I thought about Davis too. What I struggle with him, doesn't it feel like, because you're mentioning, okay, what if Nico Harrison isn't in charge anymore? The next GM will strip it down. What does the spin look like from the Dumonts if they get rid of Nico Harrison? Where it's, look, we played the good soldiers then, but he said Doncic when he said what the trade was for. We thought he said Dante. And they were talking about Ekman or something. Because it's just, how do you walk that? You said that you were just so on board with this and that like Nico was so spot on. So it feels like you would either need to, one, get rid of Nico and then the next person would come in and move Anthony Davis, or Anthony Davis needs to ask for it, which I am curious. Maybe he would. He's wanted to play with Kyrie, but when is Kyrie going to return next season? And otherwise, the Mavericks, I don't think they have the cover to move Anthony Davis because of the Luka Doncic trade. And it's sort of it's not throwing good money after bad, but you're going to be stubborn and try and see this vision out because you made such a stink about what will probably go down as one of the most inexplicable trades in NBA history. So it felt like the scope of realistic scenarios where he would be moved in the near future wasn't wide enough for me to take. But like, I'm saying that, like, I might have taken him at number 5. So it's just,
I mean, so do you think it would be the right decision for Dallas to trade Anthony Davis? Forget the likelihood of it. Like, is that what they should do ASAP?
Yes, because if you were getting rid of Luka Doncic, you have to separate the return now. But if you were ever getting Luka Doncic, there's no scenario in which you shouldn't be starting over if you were getting rid of Luka Doncic.
So I agree with that. The fact that it's the right decision kind of makes it seem less likely that Dallas is going to make it. But maybe they see the light, and maybe, like, sometimes with bad ownership, which, like, so far that's our assessment of what's happening in Dallas. Bad ownership is so easily swayed by whether it's like in Sacramento, like random advisors that just get to make decisions or whatever. Like, I could see fan sentiment actually pushing the Dumonts to be like, all right, well, it's pretty clear nobody's happy with this. So if we just trade Davis and start all the way over, maybe some of the fans we lost will come back, or maybe we'll stop. Hey, at the very least, we're going to get fewer fire Nico chants if we actually fire Nico. Like, maybe this is the way for the ownership group to actually, like, claw back a little bit of like positive favor. But yeah, like, because it's the right decision, it's probably not going to get made. But we'll see. I don't love the pick. I feel like it's a reach, but I wanted him on my board.
Are we ready for what is this? My number 4 pick?
Right? Yeah, you've got 2 more. I've got 1.
I'm going to go with, and I've pushed back against this person being included on similar exercises. I'm going to go with Zion Williamson.
Okay.
And I think there are a couple things here that the Pelicans, if they end up winning the lottery or they get someone who they think is going to be their best player of the future, it might be difficult to envision Zion Williamson scaling down into a certain role. And that would then give them the gall to look at moving him. And he's played well enough to close the year that you could get, and just the way his contract is protected, where there's weight check-ins and there's games played threshold, that you're never technically on the hook for all of it, like right, like for the following season. The other, I think, and by the way, you still hear rumblings, just like unofficially, about how he wanted to be in New York all along. I don't see I mean, I guess the Nets have stuff.
Oh, I see what you're doing here. You're gonna speak Zion to the Knicks into existence now.
No, I've watched the Knicks defense for the entire season. You know what they need? They need Zion.
You don't like the Zion Cat front court?
They probably have to trade Cat to get him to make some of the money. But so the other thing, though, that I'm looking at is, are we sure that, like, this front office, the David Griffin led front office, is going to be the one that's hanging around past this draft pick? Maybe, because we've seen him make these other decisions, but like, it does seem as if they'll let David Griffin and co change the head coach first. But if you bring a new front office in here at any point, or even just if you're talking about David Griffin hiring a new head coach and you have a top 4 pick, DeJounte Murray, we don't know when he's going to play next season. Yeah, you did pay Trey Murphy, but that's kind of it. But the first thing, I try to look at it as, if a new executive came in here, given the situation the Pelicans are in right now, what's the first thing they're doing? They're trading Zion Williamson.
Right.
And so the fact that that possibility is there, I think that, and coupled with New Orleans going to have a really high pick, I would feel even much if you told me that they finished like first or second in the lottery. I might have even included Zion Williamson a little bit higher.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, now if it's Cooper Flag somehow, if it's Cooper Flag, are they more or less likely to trade Zion? Because fit wise, I could see it a little bit.
And but the other devil's advocate point is Zion at his pinnacle when he's healthy is just so good that it's not, oh, we're trading Zion with the hope of we eventually are bad enough to draft someone as good or even get picks back where we could draft someone as good as him. It's we're hoping we get someone who's like 50% of peak Zion Williamson or something. So that kind of undermines my point here. But the situation in New Orleans just feels it's been sitting like this for too long. And
Yeah,
philosophically, it feels like everything needs a reset with the organization. And maybe if a new front office came in, they might approach just building around Zion and this year's pick differently. And Trey Murphy, of course. But yeah, the flag stuff, I think personally, I think it would make it more likely that they trade Zion Williamson. Just maybe not because Cooper Flag is this unknown quantity, but aren't there questions about, well, how well can Cooper Flag score from the perimeter? So you want two
sure.
ball dominant guys who aren't going to stretch the floor for
Yeah.
you?
So I think you're so right about just like whether it's right, whether it's smart or not. Sometimes when like I don't know, frame it this way: the preseason questions about a team are the same year after year after year. Now it's not like Zion's been in the league for 15 seasons, but like just think about what we do prior to every year. It's like, what's the biggest question for the Pelicans? Or like, what do the Pelicans need? And it's seems like it's been forever. It's like, well, there's not really anything to talk about beyond like, is Zion going to be healthy and hold up? Like that's been the core thing to discuss about the Pelicans for what seems like a really long time. And that just gets stale. And so that might be that like that's a point in your favor picking him to be traded because like especially if the same management is there, it's just like so if Zion is still on the Pelicans going into next season, even after the way he's played for this stretch lately, the question is gonna be, can he stay healthy? What kind of shape is he in? Like, man, isn't it difficult to build around a player like this, even though the upside is like it'll be the same. And like I can just imagine the Pelicans deciding, David Griffin deciding, like, I would be nice to like run a normal team or a team that just has a different question than the same one we've, had to wrestle with every year.
Do you think what also could be, and I didn't think of this until now, isn't this like their last best chance to get real value for Zion? Because if you're moving him after this, it's from a position of weakness when you look at how much time is left on his deal, or it's that and or something has now gone even more wrong, and maybe
Mm.
that thing that went wrong is Zion himself.
Well, yeah, that's just a flipped version of like the reality that every time he plays really well for a long stretch, it's like, I think we need to sell high. Like that, that's just what you should be thinking about. Now, that changes if like he plays this well for all of next season, and then you're just not trading him, like because he's great. But yeah, you're always it's just the same thing. Like he's awesome until he's not. And there's been a lot of not because he hasn't been healthy or in shape. And you're just gonna be, as the Pelicans, constantly worried that, well, we missed our last chance to move him for something really good. And now there have been enough laps around the like, oh, hamstring again, that you just can't ever trade him for value. The non-guarantees help or the partials help, but still, like yeah, you would be constantly thinking about like, oh, did we miss the window if you're the Pelicans?
Who
I
is
have
your
a pick.
final pick?
I have a final pick. Okay. Again, I'm going to leave Dame. There's two guys to choose between. I suspect you'll pick the other one. Um, I'm going to go with LaMelo Ball. Not quite the same amount of like actual, substance in terms of, oh, he's going to be traded as, say, certainly not as Durant and even as like Sabonis. What you do hear is a lot of reporting, well, teams will be interested if the Hornets make him available. And you couple that with like, what is Charlotte's timeline? Like they Tajon Salon is still a teenager. Massive project and they reached for him in this most recent draft. Mark Williams is like an ancient 23, and they tried to trade. They did trade him. And now he's back. And what they tried to trade him for were firsts and another rookie. Like, so that suggests to me that Charlotte, and we've praised them for this, is looking real long term here. So it's just pretty easy for me to imagine Charlotte moving Williams again, or Ball, and just saying like, yeah, Brandon Miller's the guy, or at least until we get the next guy that's even younger, and we build around those two, and we're gonna operate like we're the Thunder or the Jazz or whatever, where we hoard picks and we just, this thing will develop on its own time, and LaMelo is, already making a rookie max, and like he's not like, you can't say he's too old for them, but I think like he does take up a fair amount of the oxygen, and like kind of is a defining player. And if you're not trying to win now, I'm not sure that type of player has more value to you like in person than he does as what you could turn him into pick and young asset wise. So it's just kind of a standard. He's not quite in the timeline. His value, I think, is fairly high because he's young and he will just improve whoever's offense he goes to, Orlando. And so I've got to make him the last pick because I wouldn't have felt good about him staying unselected.
It's interesting. He was on my list, like, to be in the top 5 too. He has 4 years on his deal after this one, and like it continues to like decline in terms of what it's going to be worth to the cap, like 22.5% of the salary cap during what would be his age 27 season. I feel like if people weren't speculating so much, like if I was just to remove myself from that discourse, I never would have considered him, because I think it would be batshit crazy for Charlotte to move someone who has not asked or indicated that he doesn't want to be there. And when everything you just said, they're so far away. It's, how does moving LaMelo get you any close? He clearly hasn't ruined your tank. You're going to be a bottom 4 team this year. Yeah. And so unless he agitates for it, or unless they think that his ankles are cooked or something.
There's that too. Yeah.
Which, by the way, is a possibility. And you're right, there definitely would get, and I think what also makes your case is there will be a wide range of teams where it's like a Utah. They might be in on LaMelo Ball, even though they're not close to competing. But in Orlando, which is a team that wants to make the jump to contention, or maybe even Detroit, like they would be teams that would talk about him. So I think that certainly helps him being included. When you're Charlotte and you look at this team, LaMelo and Brandon Miller are the only just building blocks that you have. When one of those building blocks has already made an all-star team and is still under contract for another 4 years, I look at it in my mind and say, I guess if you get like an absurd offer, which is always possible, this is just something I'm not even discussing until at least next, like summer 2026.
Yeah, you're right. It is weird because he is still young and he's like, it's on the fund max. The team controls there. Like, you're right. If not for the rumblings, I don't think you'd point to if not for the rumblings, we would just be talking about Charlotte as like, well, they got like, 40% of their, the next great starting lineup in place because you got Miller and you got LaMelo and you just figure out the rest. It's, it's not like LaMelo's already 28 or whatever, or is on his third deal, but it's just, we're talking about it. So we got to talk about it. And it just, sometimes these things, snowball from speculation into reality. And it feels like there's just enough reality, especially with just the way Charlotte has conducted business, that makes it seem more likely.
Yeah. It buys you, if you're the front office, it buys you time, right? If Jeff Peterson trades LaMelo, it's like, hey, our timeline's like this 11-year timeline. You can keep me around or whatever.
Well, and you've got the he's not our guy angle. Like this front office didn't pick him. That always matters.
Yeah. So again, I consider him. Before we get to my player, do you want to guess? Because you said I'm probably going to pick one of these two. I think I know who you're going to say, and I think you're wrong.
Well, so I was choosing between LaMelo and Jaylen Brown. And I thought you might take Jaylen Brown just on I'll let you speak about it if that is who you're going to take.
I'm not taking Jaylen Brown.
Okay.
And I think we should probably go through some of the names that people were expecting quickly after this. Sure. My final pick, and I'm curious if you'd be surprised, I'm going with Alperen Şengün.
Okay. I would say I'm mildly surprised.
I was aiming to shock you. Let me try another name. Steph Curry.
Stop it.
So his contract is going to kick in next year, 5 years, $185 million. That is just, in terms of percentage of the salary cap, it begins at 22% and it'll decline to 17% in the final. That it's a player option. So his like by the time he's about to become a free agent, he'll have been under a contract at 19% of the salary cap. His player options for his age 27 season. The timeline just works in Houston. He was their all-star this year. Whether you think he's their best player right now, there's a debate over who is their best player of the future moving forward. It's not the same conversation we have about the Jazz because Houston just has a ton of viable candidates. I would say, 3, because I'm still that high on Reed Shepherd. The reason he's here for me is we've so often defaulted to Jalen Green is going to be the money he makes more, like per year, is going to be the money that gets sent out in any consolidation trade. I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, if the Rockets make a consolidation trade, Grant, they're either going to go after a lead guard or they'll be in like the Giannis sweepstakes. And those are two types of players that arguably make Alperen Şengün expendable to you. And I think you could look at Şengün more so than Jalen Green as another team. If you're entering a rebuilding phase, maybe you don't view him as your tentpole of the future, but that's someone who's young. You could start to build around. I think he certainly can like elevate your floor as an offense. And then I also wonder from Houston's standpoint, it's how well will he mesh with new incoming talent? Like we've seen him play with Jabari Smith. We've seen him play with Amen Thompson. They've been playing him and Steven Adams together lately and just absolutely like steamrolling opponents. So I'm not saying that he's too limiting. I just think that for what they need, and because they also have Amen Thompson on this team, like that's just the fit there is just not super intuitive. They've made it work, but if you're trying to build this top-notch offense, I think at some point you end up marginalizing at least one of them because you're not going to put them in their optimal spot when they're on the floor together. And so I think Alperen Şengün is a much more value. Like I would give up more for Şengün than I would for Jalen Green in a trade right now. And I think that helps the Rockets in their pursuit of another star. And maybe I just end up being this, I think was my like biggest gamble. I've been thinking about him since number 2 because it's just, he's on such a good contract. He's so good to that team, but I also just don't like, he hasn't necessarily elevated this offense at points to where it needs to be. There's still questions about his jump shot. We've seen like, honestly, he had more room to improve defensively, but like his progression curve, it's been more impressive on defense than, he's the more impressive offensive player, but for maybe what they need, like if you need him to complement more like the players that you have or the player that you're going to trade for, I just don't know that he's as bankable there. And I really think I'm just twisting myself into a pretzel saying it might also just be a way of teams will want Alperen Şengün, and that'll be the cost of doing business if you want to get the next great player.
Yeah, I think like it's hard to say, and we do this, like I'm worried about how he's going to scale. We're just kind of really talking about the idea of he's a little Sabonis-y. I know that's a lazy comp, but it's like just because of what he's good at and not good at, it's just you've got to make concessions elsewhere. Like Jabari Smith becomes like way too important because of what he might be able to do to offset what Şengün doesn't. Like there's that whole thing. And you say, well, how good can the Rockets get? It's like, well, the Rockets are by unanimous agreement, like way ahead of schedule. Like they're not supposed to be this good yet. And Şengün has factored into that, as much as almost anybody, maybe more than anybody on the current roster. So all this stuff about, can he scale up and how good can you be on both ends with, like, there's all that to it. But I hadn't thought of, I'm going to steal this line of thinking because I hadn't thought of it. I just like the idea that if the Rockets are going to go get what they need, those things will make Şengün less valuable, and Şengün is probably the best way to get those things. So it all just sort of aligns. I think you're right. So lead ball handler, well, what do we need Şengün for? Like, I really think that is a strong logical trail to follow there. And I was just imagining, if it's Giannis, like if I'm the Bucks, I'm feeling pretty good about Şengün being like, hey, he's young, we can run the offense through him. Like, so if you're after a superstar, he is kind of the route to get there too. Yeah, I think that's a good pick. I wasn't going to take him. We discussed off air, like, I don't know, is Jalen Green a fit? I think Şengün is the right choice there. I applaud you. You gave me something to think about I hadn't thought about before.
And the other thing I did think about, obviously the money matters here because Şengün is going to make more than Amen Thompson. But if a team wants like who are you, if you're the Rockets, who are you more likely to give up in a trade? Is it Şengün or Amen Thompson?
Şengün.
That also, because I think more teams might be interested in Amen Thompson, just the rookie scale of it all and what he
Right.
does defensively. But like Şengün, there's kind of, well, we know what he's going to make for the next half decade. And
Mhm.
there's proof of concept on the offensive end for him. So that, like, all that just sort of, I'm glad at least one person supports this pick.
I'm in. You want to run through some names here? So I mentioned Jaylen Brown. It's just you could throw. We may as well just discuss Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis here as well. Like, they fall a little shorter of the star designation than Brown, but it's just a money thing. We talked about the sale of the Celtics. We don't know what the stomach for a $500 million payroll plus tax bill is going to be. And Brown makes a ton, and he's the guy that, like, he's not none of those guys are expendable, but if you're really trying to make a huge dent in what this team costs, like that is the guy that you would move as Boston. They don't want to do it, but financially he's just the most obvious guy to go.
Right. And if I thought that there was even a chance that they would visit that this summer, he might have actually just made my list because of how, like, it's so easy to spin it that way.
Yeah, it was between him and LaMelo for my last pick, and it would have you can't choose Brown or, I mean, and to a lesser extent, the other two guys, Porzingis or Holiday, unless you think maybe Boston gets knocked out, pre-conference finals, or gets its ass kicked in the conference finals or something like that.
And the other thing too is I really do think that they would try, if they do something this summer, it's gonna be to do it without moving Jaylen Brown, to where it's, they include a first round pick to get off of Drew Holiday, or there'll be a taker for Kristaps. So that factored in. Another name that I think people would be expecting to see, Trae Young.
Yep.
My whole thing, there's definitely going to be that organic conversation this summer because he's 1 year out from his option year. So 2 years until free agency. But the Hawks don't control their own draft picks until after 2027. And I also, similar to Sabonis, I don't know what Trae Young's market is, but if you're the Kings, I think you can take not a King's ransom for Domas Sabonis, and people are just like, oh, they'll be trolled because they gave up Tyrese Halliburton to get him. But if you're the Hawks and you just accept whatever package for Trae Young, that's just a tough press conference to win. And again, it'd be different if you controlled your own draft. You don't. And you've also, now that De'Aaron Fox is in San Antonio, that team that owned your picks has now been taken off the board.
Yeah. Who else would I throw out here? I got Şengün down there. We mentioned Jalen Green. I mean, we can probably knock him off if he's not like a quote unquote star.
We should talk about the Philly guys, right?
Well, yeah, like I had Embiid actually listed first, but you definitely like Maxey and Paul George. Embiid is like almost impossible to trade just because of the uncertainty surrounding his health and the amount of that deal going forward. But like that is the nuclear option for Philly, and we get another year close to this one, then you got to explore it. The problem is, like, it takes two sides to make a trade, and I don't like who's the team that is like willing to say we'll assume the Embiid risk. I don't know.
Who is the Embiid's owed 4 years and $248.1 million. That's what's left on his deal. Paul George has 3 years and about 162.4. Tyrese Maxey, I thought, was intriguing because if you're the Sixers and you are starting over, I understand he's young-ish, but like this deal takes him through his age 28 season. And if you're really starting over and you wind up winning the lottery for some reason, wouldn't there be some sort of argument to, like, Tyrese Maxey's already been paid, he's on his max, like, we're not trying to be good next season. If they were to move Embiid, it would not shock me if it's a situation like we talked about with Phoenix and Devin Booker. I think Embiid would need to be the first domino to fall, but it wouldn't shock me if like they did visit the Maxey trade value if they do wind up moving Embiid. But I don't know at this point. I don't even know if you could get. Jen, this has nothing to do with Embiid's talent as a player. It's just the availability and the money. I don't know that you could even get a shorter term contract. Like, if you got a shorter term contract, I don't even know if it would just be pure expirings.
Yeah. I mean, Maxey doesn't feel like he fits in this discussion, but you have to concede that from the Sixers perspective, like, that's the guy that you could reliably get positive value for, just because George and Embiid come with age and health and like cost concerns, where Maxey, it's like, unless you run him into the ground because your whole team's hurt and he pulls a hamstring, like, he's going to be relatively healthy and productive. And I get his shooting makes him fairly scalable. The defense isn't great, but like, that's the guy that if you're the Sixers and you're trying to meaningfully, I don't know, inject or like acquire positive assets or whatever, like, he's just the easiest one to trade, really, right? Like the other two guys you're gonna have to talk somebody into it, it feels like.
What about Kawhi?
He's on my
2 years
list.
left on that contract. I
Yeah.
just the possibility that he would just retire if he got moved is just I couldn't pick him.
Yeah, I mean Harden's there too, although he's got, he's probably going to opt out, and well, I don't know what he's going to do because there's no free agent money to be had. But the Clippers just kind of feel like, first of all, we like I don't know, we haven't done our executive of the year talk, but like at some point, Lawrence Frank is just going to have to rate pretty high because he kind of just made something out of nothing this year and made a lot of good decisions. But it doesn't feel like, well, certainly like realistically, the Harden Kawhi core has got what, 1, 2 more good years in it realistically, just because of age and health and stuff. So the idea of like the clock ticking on that is a pretty big motivating factor for both of those two guys being moved.
A couple other names here. I thought that the Timberwolves guys, Julius Randle has the player option, so that not knowing whether he's going to opt out or in made it
Mhm.
tough. And then I have Rudy Gobert as well, where he's about to start that 3-year extension next year, which is it's running through his age 35 season with a player option and a sub 23% of the salary cap, 3 years, 110 million. I just if they're going to enter the Kevin Durant sweepstakes somehow, it's one of those guys I assume would be the one of the primary like outgoing money. I just don't know. If you're moving Julius, the problem was with them. If you're moving Julius Randle or Rudy Gobert in a vacuum, I don't know what actual value you're getting unless the team like it would be Phoenix is painted into a corner somehow, or Phoenix is desperate to remain competitive. That's why Rudy Gobert I think is the better fit for this exercise than Julius Randle.
Yeah. I did have Randall. I didn't have Gobert on my list. Bradley Beal, like they really wanted to trade him, and all it would have taken was him waiving the no trade. Maybe in the off season, that gets we get some clarity, and Beal is like relenting finally. I mean, like definitely the Suns don't want to have Bradley Beal anymore. So that's a pretty big factor in will a guy get traded or not.
So I didn't have him on my list, and can I let you know why?
Please.
He hasn't made an all-star game in a half decade.
He's not a star. That's right. Oh man. Yeah. Well, he's got a big name still. I don't know. Yeah. He's a third option on a playing team. That's pretty good.
That people were wondering should they even bring him back from his hamstring injury? Or are they better off without him? And then they got
Oh,
trucked by the Celtics. Here's a name I don't even know if we need to go through like any other more, but this would be it's a spicy one, but I legitimately thought about including him. Karl Anthony Towns with the Knicks. He
yeah.
has 3 years left on that contract, and I don't think they can look at Mitchell Robinson and say, well, we don't trust Karl Anthony Towns' defense. We're confident with Mitch moving forward. He's cheaper. But it's just the Knicks probably deserve more time because of the degree to which they've shaken up the roster, but they've done so in a way where they don't really have any other options.
Mhm.
And if they've been mentioned to Giannis, like if Giannis wanted to go to New York, and it's the player, like, yeah, you have Bridges and Anunoby, and I guess you could step ladder that way to get assets that would go to Milwaukee, but Karl Anthony Towns' number is so big. And I think that if you were going to do something, I know his contract is massive, paying him over, what does he have, 3 years left at like 168 million bucks. Just a floor space. If you believe you have the defensive infrastructure to protect him, which the Knicks clearly did not, I don't view his 3-year, $71 million commitment as too taxing. I mean, it's huge, but also you talk about scalability. Like his offense will just basically fit anywhere. And so that's just a name I kind of have circled, not because I think the Knicks are necessarily going to blow it up, but if there's a way for them to get a bigger name, Karl Anthony Towns, I think, is good enough to fit. Oh, we traded a star for star. Or maybe they
Mhm.
needed to attach something to said star, but that he's still good enough to carry that type of mystique.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. We're getting pretty speculative here, but I don't think you should assume Jimmy Butler will continue to be happy forever. So, like, if the Warriors, losing the play-in or whatever, or he just doesn't turn into playoff Jimmy, and then you're a year down the road again, and maybe you start getting some of the typical like, by the way, he's already like getting to fly separately and stay separately from the team, and like that's all happening. I can envision a scenario where the Warriors are looking at it like, well, okay, we took a crack at it with him, but can we flip him for someone else in that price range? So just put a pin in that one,
Can I put a pin in another name?
please.
Draymond Green.
Yeah, I
There's
mean,
there's just emotionally you don't think that they're not going to trade Steph. I read, like, if we're being serious, they're not going to trade Steph,
mhm.
but something could go sour between him and the organization more than it ever would with Steph. And I also am just more open to the idea that I asked more this. If the Suns said they'd trade you like Kevin Durant for Jimmy Butler, would you do it? And I said that I probably wouldn't. But like, I think if you gave the Warriors truth serum, they might, even though he's so important, especially when they're playing smaller, that he feels if they're going to go out and get another star, maybe it's a younger star, like you would rather trade Draymond Green than Jimmy Butler.
Yeah, I mean, just if you took all of the stuff out of it that you can't take out of it, I think that's right. Because it just age. You know what I mean? If you took the emotion, the sentiment, the history, the connection to Steph, like that's the thing. Because of course they're not trading Steph. I'm not sure you could trade Draymond Green because Steph would say, "Do not trade Draymond Green," and you have to listen to him. But like, as far as what he provides on the court, like his trajectory going forward, given his age, given the fit issues that persist, like it's harder to have Jimmy Butler and Jonathan Kuminga in the game because Draymond Green doesn't, it's all the same stuff. But yeah, I think you're right. I just like, that boy, that's not the nuclear option, but that's close because it would piss off Steph.
I will say, because we had Giannis and because we had Sabonis, like Levine and Damian Lillard, we already talked about Lillard, like they just have their own cases then. I don't trust that the Kings would, even if they move Sabonis, like I think that they would view either Levine as the primary building block of a contender, or they're still trying to be good and don't want to get rid of him. The Dame is one where it's, because I didn't pick Giannis, I didn't feel obligated to pick Dame. But like that's probably just one where, if we think Giannis is going to be traded, Dame's not going to be far behind if he's behind.
Yeah, right. I probably should have taken him, but I thought you might, just because like strategically you could undercut my Giannis pick by taking Dame.
You know what's interesting now that this is over, and I'm sure that some people just haven't listened to this far. I didn't go in this exercise necessarily trying to be to beat you. Like I want to be correct, but I went into it. I was like, I want to have these discussions, and so like I would have picked Giannis, to be clear, and then because I picked Giannis, I might have then picked Dame.
Yeah, right. You're kind of committed that way.
Any other names sort of stand out?
I think I'm about out. Yeah, you picked
Aaron Fox a little bit. What if the Spurs just were able to flip him for more value than they got, or I was trying to think of like the lead play. Like, what if they won? Let's say they win the draft lottery and get Cooper Flagg. Do you want De'Aaron Fox still, or are you trying to like parlay his expiring contract into a better fit?
And then if you think Castle is going to be the guy that should be on the ball, like I mean, you can't. I don't think if you had like 50 more games this year and Castle could show you, like he can't. I don't think he can convince them of that with what's remaining of this season. But it is a conversation. That was the thing about Fox, is it's like you didn't pay a price that made it so he has to be like a mainstay. He has to be our number 2. You could let him go or flip him. Like that's fine. Like it just, you're early enough in the Wemby era. While you should be trying to compete when he's great, which he already is, like you're not married to Fox as your second option, like by any stretch. So yeah, I think he's an interesting one.
Yeah, Steph Castle. He's his efficiency is improved, which means he's still shooting sub 40 effective field goal percentage on jumpers. We were having this conversation about how we need to put ourselves, do a better job putting ourselves in fans' shoes. And I understand why Spurs fans say that he is the only rookie of the year option, but it's just the justification of look at how much more efficient he is since the All-Star break. And I'm just like the primary issue is still the primary issue. I don't care what volume it is.
That's the thing. I wrote something about him the other day, and it was just like, if you just take his like per 36 numbers, or take his numbers as a starter, or whatever you want, like they don't, he's still just a net negative guy because of the shooting. If you just pretend that he had like league average numbers from the field and from 3, so like 46, 36, he's just like, he's a superstar. Like it's not even like, sorry, like right today, not like, oh, he projects as one. It's like, no, he just is a superstar. That's where he would be if he were a league average shooter, which shows you how bad. I mean, the shooting is just, I mean, he's going to be someone we talk about for a long time in one way or the other, as like, hey, man, remember when we thought all it would take for Castle to be great was shooting? And like, of course, guys never learn how to shoot well when they're that bad. Or it's like, we'll always point to him as the guy that figured it out, and he'll be the reason we buy into every super good young player that does everything but shoot because he figured it out. So they, you know what I mean? He's going to be
Him,
like a real touchstone.
I would say him or like one of the Thompson brothers has the
Right.
chance to change like the way we scout forever.
One
Forever.
way or the other. We're going to write off a shit ton of really talented guys if none of those three ever figure out how to shoot. And if they do, then we'll always buy in. Like they're going to change how we think for a long time.
A couple of this is very quickly. I would have probably picked one of the Miami guys, Bam or Tyler Hero, if they had any sort of control over their picks. Like their net two of their next three picks are just basically, or two of their next four are gone. That's just tough. And I don't think Tyler Hero doesn't have the cachet to say move me. And I just don't see Bam just sign the extension. And the other one, but I couldn't do it, even though I view him more highly than Bradley Beal right now. He last made an All-Star game earlier than Bradley Beal. It was 2020, and Beal made one in 2021. Just Brett Ingram in Toronto, it just, if they viewed him as a salary placeholder that they plan to attach more stuff to try and bring in someone who might be a better fit for that roster. But I didn't know if he'd qualify. If I wasn't going to put Beal, I didn't think I could put Ingram.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we've gone far enough down the list of if we're talking about Ingram and Beal.
Do you want to take us out of here unless you have anything else to say?
No, thanks everybody for checking this episode out. Let us know. I mean, this will be fun to keep track of, but let us know if we missed anybody or who you would have had first. If you would have taken Dame first ahead of Giannis, I think that's an interesting, or before Giannis, not first. As always, please rate, review, subscribe wherever you're listening to this. If you're watching us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up there. Leave us some comments. Let us know what you thought. Join our Discord. Links for that in the YouTube and podcast description. And as always, we're going to close with a shout to Frank Ntilikina and an apology to Jared Allen, neither of whom are on the trade block.